Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of College Football After Dark, right around brunch time. But it's a big week for daily fantasy college football. We got a couple of live finals. Chop and myself are going to be heading out to the West Coast here in the next day or so. So we thought we'd fire this up a little bit early to kind of fit our travel schedules and still kind of give you some of the college football content that you hopefully look forward to each and every week here on rotogrinders.com. Again, I'm Dan Bach. We've got David Head Chopper Kaplan. And Chopper, the week is finally here. You know, we've been asking for live finals for college football events, and we get the first two in DFS history out there in California, Fantasy Aces, and over there for the Playboy Mansion on FanDuel. Don't know about you. Actually, I do know about you. You queued for both, so you're feeling really good. I got into one over there on FanDuel, but it's pretty awesome that it's finally here, man.
Yeah, looking forward to it. This has been something that, I mean, it's real easy to just overlook it, but, you know, going back, thinking about 2 years ago, doing this 2-3 years ago for college football, back when Daily Joust was around, to think that, you know, if you would have said back then, in 2015, you guys are going to have a live event for yourselves, college football, payouts of 100,000 over here, 250,000 over here, you know, that kind of money at stake, and you know, all the big festivities that go around with a live event. I would have said, wow, you know, I wouldn't have thought it was going to happen, but it's here and it's happened. So I'm glad to be part of it.
No doubt. And it's going to be a fun weekend. It's going to almost be a little bit of a throwback, Chopper, because, you know, a lot of these NFL finals, they're hard to queue because they're so big. The seat values are so high. And, you know, even a lot of the name players, now certainly some have queued for those, but a lot of them haven't. And it's going to be kind of a throwback to a couple of years ago where a lot of the guys who I think we're going to be meeting up with this weekend will be, you know, having a good time together. And I'm looking forward to that, and should be a fun slate of games for us to look at. So we will certainly do that. Do want to remind you, DraftKings, they have their live final coming up, I believe, in a couple of weeks. This might even be their last weekend to qualify for that. So I know they have a 5K queue. That's right, 5K queue. I think it's like 38 people, top 7 make it, and there's only like 4 spots left. I really am tempted to do that, Chop, but I don't know. It's a little bit beyond my bankroll. Might need some stakers to make that happen. But ultimately, they've got some other buy-in price points as well for their live finals. Certainly check them out over there on DraftKings. And their final is going to be in San Diego, I believe, 2 weeks from now, if I'm not mistaken. So the week after Thanksgiving. But Chop, we always look at the early slate. You know, going early, late is just too hard for us, just too much content for us to do in about 45 minutes to an hour. So we're going to look at the early slates on FanDuel, DraftKings, and hopefully kind of help you out as you build your lineups here this Saturday. And again, it's early in the week. A lot of stuff can certainly change. And, you know, we'll obviously kind of do the best we can based on the information and even the research. I mean, it's still even a little bit early for us in the week, looking at 11:30 on Wednesday as opposed to 9 o'clock on Thursday, or 11:30 Wednesday to 9 on Thursday. There's a lot of time in there for us to kind of do extra prep that we normally get. So we'll just try and kind of set it up for you. And I'll say one thing that stood out to me here, looking at the early slate on FanDuel and DraftKings, Chop, is it seems like the last few weeks we've had a handful of games that had totals in the mid-60s, into the 70s. Hell, I think we even had in the 80s. And as far as I know, what I'm seeing here is we've got one game with a point total projected into the 70s and not a whole lot even into the upper 60s. So this isn't kind of filled up with you know, Big 12 shootouts here.
Yeah, and it really reflects the player pool really reflects that also, because it's tough to find guys. You know, those big name guys just aren't jumping out in those big games, and you're kind of looking like, man, where's all the really good players at in good matchups? It's a lot harder to find them, and it's because those high-profile games aren't on there. Those big teams like Baylor, for some reason, are just playing different game sets. They're playing at night, or they have bye weeks or something. So, but I enjoy it. This is going to be fun digging into this and trying to find those sleepers.
Absolutely. And FanDuel and DraftKings, a little bit different in some of the games that they have on their early slates here. DraftKings must really love Western Kentucky because I don't know why else you're throwing Western Kentucky, Florida International into your game set. But I think it goes without saying. We try to kind of touch up on the individual games on the sites here that, players from Western Kentucky absolutely in play here against FIU. It's a road game, so maybe it won't be a blowout. And, I don't know if I really want to go Anthony Wales. You could. He's been really good. But for me, the wide receivers on Western Kentucky look a bit cheaper than I come to expect. Taylor at 62, Dangerfield at 59. They haven't put up gaudy numbers late, but I think if I'm getting exposure to this game, you can never go wrong with Doughty. But I think some of those wide receivers are priced pretty reasonable.
Yeah, they seem like they're in a pretty good spot here. It's Western Kentucky. They're gonna score points. I think I wrote something up this week that said you're almost guaranteed that these guys get into the 40s, and they're probably have a pretty good opportunity to get into the 50s. You're going to want to get some pieces of these guys in this game, and it's all spearheaded by Doughty. So play it how you. I think there's a lot of different ways to play this game. I don't even mind some Florida International guys. Mr. Magoo at quarterback over there he's got some sneaky value this week.
Alex Magoo?
Alex Magoo, whatever they want to call him. They're not on TV very much. I don't hear anybody pronouncing his name, so I have no idea. But the numbers look pretty good, I think, in this game. Western Kentucky is just one of those teams. They're going to score. They're going to make you score, and their defense isn't that great. So even though it's been better at times this year than what we've been accustomed to in the past, but they're still going to force the issue to make you score. And so, anybody who they play is going to have value too. So I'm not hating on the Florida International guys, even though their names aren't going to jump off to you because they're unfamiliar. This might be the first time they've been in a game set here all year long, right? I'm not even sure.
That's a great point, Shop. I mean, you look at it too. You're right. I mean, Western Kentucky's defense is not infallible. I mean, they're going to give up points. And you got a guy like Thomas Owens just looking through his game logs here. Touchdowns in every game but 2. And he's sitting at 4K. I mean, that seems like a solid wide receiver play for you. And maybe makes this game a little bit more stackable because you could get some cheap guys over there on Florida International side of things. We always kind of look for a game that, potentially could have shootout to it. Anytime Western Kentucky is involved, they kind of fit the bill. Now, looking on FanDuel, there's really only one game that I'm seeing that they've got in their early slate that DraftKings doesn't, and that's Duke in Virginia. And typically we wouldn't think this is a particularly interesting game here, but Thomas Sirk didn't play last week. And we had this guy named Parker Bamey. Is that right? Parker Bamey? 6,100 over there on FanDuel and basically put up Thomas Sirk type numbers last week. 248 passing, 80 rushing, did give you a rushing touchdown as well. He adds on a passing touchdown there, and you're looking at upwards of 25 fantasy points. What do you think about him versus Virginia? I mean, this game could have, sneaky scoring to it.
Yeah, I think that I've highlighted both of them on my, whatever you want to call it. I highlighted both of them because, I'm waiting on word. If Sirk is out, whoever starts in this game for Duke is going to be an option, in my opinion. So I'm just kind of waiting on that definitive word. But I think they're both in play. I think they both have whichever one's going to be the starter. You'd like it to be Parker because he's cheaper, and that always helps. But I think either one of them could be a good play against Virginia, who's not been as stout on defense as we've seen the past couple of years. They're actually getting into a little bit more of a shootout territory this year. So I'm down with either one of them, and preferably Parker because of his price. So let's just hope we get some real word that Sirk is out for sure.
Yeah, I don't think we can care too much about the running game on either of these two sides, but my boy Kanan Severin had himself a day last time out. 8 for 116 and 3 touchdowns. Where was that when he was my master lock of the week? My goodness, Kanan. But at 5,700, I think he's somebody to potentially consider here.
Yeah, you needed that. If you're going to play that big $5,000 game on DraftKings, that'll make you sleep easier. You don't But I mean, he's, we've the reason why you mentioned him on your locks earlier this year, and the reason why I wrote him up before is because he's got that kind of potential in him. So he's one of those guys. He's not going to go out there and, I look at it like a Corey Coleman, and he's the obvious guy, but there's a lot of them like Coleman. Just go out there and steadily put you up good numbers, and that's the guys you pencil into cash games. Guys like Severin, I don't necessarily want to play in cash, but boy, in GPPs, it doesn't get a whole lot better than guys like that. Guys who just come out of nowhere every few weeks and have these monster games just in time for when everybody else jumped off of the bandwagon. And they're going to have those big games every once in a while. So you play them in GPPs and nobody will be on them. And I think this is one of those weeks. This could be a sneaky shootout game right here.
All right, let's get some quarterback play and see who our top options here on the early slate. FanDuel and DraftKings. Obviously, on the high end, we've got Deshaun Watson, Marquise Williams, both those guys over 8K. Greg Ward, doubtful to play this weekend versus UConn. He's at 8,300. And then Paxton Lynch, the other guy on DraftKings who's over 8K. Tougher matchup for him on the road at Temple. I think that puts Watson and Williams as at least the top tier guy at this price level. If you had to pick one on, again, we'll preface this on Wednesday morning, who you prefer, Watson or Williams?
That's a good one, but I mean, I'm going to lean towards Marquise Williams right now. For a few different reasons. I would think that the blowout factor in Clemson seems to me like it's greater than Marquise Williams. Just something about Deshaun Watson. I don't mind him. I think that there's some some upside there, but there's also a piece of me that looks at the game and says, wow, are they really going to be that excited for Wake Forest at home? It's a blowout written all over it. Marquise, man, this team right here is on a roll. They are sneaky backdoor in this conference title and, trying to get into that playoff picture. And they're on a roll because he's so good. So, and this is a game where it's more competitive, and Virginia Tech, though, has shown some real holes in their defense this year. I mean, they gave up like a ton of points a few weeks ago to Duke and Thomas Sirk. If Thomas Sirk can have a career day on you, then Marquise Williams can. So I like Marquise Williams this week.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly, when you look at the numbers, 60.5 the total, touchdown, very close competitive game, the line, compared to Clemson, who is, 49 the total, and they're favored by 30 points. We could easily fall into a position here where Clemson just blows them out. It's over by the third quarter, and Watson is, hitting on girls on the stands. That very well could play itself out. But the question is whether or not Watson gets it done. It's how much he gets done in the time he's on the field. No Wayne Gallman, it looks like, this week at the running back spot. And even though I agree with you on a lot of your points, I got a sneaky suspicion that Deshaun Watson has like a 5-touchdown game here.
What? The one thing I looked at, the first thing I thought of when I looked at it was this could be a good game we'll get into wide receivers later, but Watson to Artavis Scott on those little short passes to try to make up a little bit in the running game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Scott he had 12 receptions last week. Hasn't found the end zone much, but I mean, I just think like that could be a combination that goes 3 times. If you have that 3 times over, you're in a pretty good spot. So I'm not writing him off. I think the price tags, it's all about whether or not we can find some value, and I think we can today, this week. So I think Watson very well could match Marquise or exceed Marquise. But in terms of, I think, maybe upside between the two, in terms of one of these guys having a 50 fantasy point day, I don't think there's a chance in hell Watson kind of gets to that far. But I think Williams could, simply by a back and forth overtime possibility that really isn't in play with Watson. So both, I think, going to put up huge numbers this week. Let's move down to the next level, and I think it gets pretty interesting here, where we've got Vernon Adams, J.T. Barrett, Cody Kessler, all kind of in the 7K range. You could throw Bercovici in there as well. Over on FanDuel, pretty similar. Barrett at 8,800, and they've got Adams and Kessler a little bit cheaper there at the 7K range. Let's talk about Barrett real quick on FanDuel, because there seems to be a big discrepancy between him on FanDuel compared to those other guys as opposed to DraftKings. Does that make him exclusively a DraftKings play for that reason, or are you excited about this potential back and forth versus Michigan State?
No, it's definitely – he's not a guy I would want to go all in on anyway. So if I'm going to play him, then I'm definitely just going to limit it to DraftKings. He's that guy. He's a 50-point guy this week, and you like him anyway, then I guess it doesn't matter. But in this case, if you have a need to play Barrett and you feel like you want to play him, just limit him to DraftKings, because that's where your best value is. And it's a good way just to split things up and spread out your money a little bit and not be all in on one guy and have the best value take place. And this is DraftKings, and it's JT Barrett. I don't mind the matchup. I think he's a solid play this week. I think this game is monster huge right here, for both teams and playoffs. And so I think it's going to be a real good, solid game. And I don't mind Barrett. I definitely like the value on DraftKings, though.
Yeah, and the thing about him that I love is the games that he's played recently have been maybe more competitive than they expected, but going into it, Illinois, Rutgers, Penn State, Maryland, Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, they haven't had a game on the schedule that really says, I'm getting ready for, I'm pumped up for. This has the markings of that type of game that, Ohio State, I think we agree from a talent perspective on the field, from a coaching perspective, they are probably the best in the country. They haven't really shown it, but I also think there's a lot of disinterest. And maybe this is a spot for them to really shut up some of the naysayers and blow Michigan State out by like 30 points and be like, you know what? We just weren't interested in those other games. I know it sounds stupid. It sounds like a ridiculous narrative, but, they just could sleepwalk through Illinois and Rutgers and Penn State. I know those games were competitive, but coming into it, I guarantee you their preparation this week is way more on point than it was to those other games.
No, I agree with all those things. I think it's a joke to think that even college athletes or even pro football players can absolutely get up for every single game. You kind of have an idea going into the game kind of how it's going to play out in a lot of instances whenever you're dealing with inferior opponents like they do on a week-to-week basis. And then you finally get one like this and your season is riding on it, you're going to be amped up and extra amped up, and people don't want to believe in the narrative, but I think it's real sometimes. In a game like this, you are going to give, if it's possible, you will give extra effort in this game. And so I think all the Ohio State guys are in play here, and it's spearheaded by JT Barrett. I think it's going to be a good game.
Adams or Kessler, same price, highest total of the week. I think they're going to be really popular potentially. What do you think?
And I tell you, you asked me this a few weeks ago, and it's Cody Kessler hands down, but Vernon Adams is actually looking like the Oregon quarterback we would have expected in week one. Like, he's on fire now. He's pumping this offense down the field. It's too bad it was a few losses too late for Oregon, but USC, they haven't shown me like any kind of a shutdown defense so far, even though we know they got talent. Boy, they're virtually the same price. The spread is right on point with both of them. So, I'm going to lean Vernon Adams because the prices are so similar. I think maybe at the very least he can give you an extra rushing touchdown somewhere and push himself up over Kessler.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think there's an easy answer for this game. And, this is one of those moments where we walk into a live final, Chop, and we look at the leaderboard and we see CSU Ram 88 with 4 lineups. And we're pretty freaking jealous because you can get some exposure to a number of guys. And, you don't necessarily just have to plant your flag on one here. And, looking back last year, let's see, trying to see, it looks like they didn't even play Oregon last year. I was hoping to get some numbers from Kessler in that matchup versus Oregon, but they didn't play him a year ago. And he has really not looked that great lately. But here's the one desirable thing that I have with Cody Kessler is that I think Juju Smith is still the top wide receiver on the slate here. And being able to have that combination could be sexy in tournaments. I certainly would not go all in on him. I certainly would not use him in cash games. But I think from a tournament perspective, we've got to give some consideration there just because this game has high potential to shoot out. And I think Juju, even though he's come down to earth a little bit, I still think he's an elite talent here. And that, makes Kessler still a little bit interesting. Adams, we've seen a little bit better, combination race recently with, the kid Carrington who's come off of suspension. But, even last game, the passing game didn't really get much going. You still always have the threat of Royce Freeman just, running rampant, through that defense and just him getting fed the ball. So I think it's a tough one. I think it's a very, very tough one. And I do wish I could get multiple exposure to each of these guys in the Playboy tournament. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So, but yeah, I think they're both good plays. Let's go cheaper on DraftKings. And I guess we can look at some of these guys on FanDuel. Guys under 7K DraftKings, and then we'll kind of chat about them a little bit on FanDuel too. What do you think?
Under 7K on DraftKings. I mean, I guess the first one that jumps out is Josh Rosen, who's been playing real well. And Utah is, I thought their defense would be better to start the year, but they've given up some pretty big games. And Rosen is kind of hitting his stride now. He's got some real nice receivers. It's tough to figure out which one he's going to throw to each week, but he finds one of them each week, and they have that monster game. So Rosen right there with a pretty good point total in Vegas too. Scrolling down past that, there's a couple guys there that the names look good, but I'd avoid the matchup, like Chad Kelly. No thank you, against LSU. Even at a good price right there, I just don't want to mess with LSU. You can go down even further, and the one guy that really interests me at 6,300 is Connor Cook, and he's not getting any respect from Vegas or pretty much anybody, but I could absolutely see 300 yards passing and 2 touchdowns minimum for Connor Cook in this kind of a game. And, for 6,300, if you can get the 300-yard bonus and throw at least 2 touchdowns, that's a pretty good game.
That's a pretty good point there. I mean, he obviously got banged up last week. I ended up coming back, 6 for 20. Not really indicative of Connor Cook. The 2 games prior to that, you're right, 335 and 4, 398 and 4. Went over 300 the 2 games prior to that, so pretty much 4 in a row. And you're right, the price is right. Probably going to be playing from behind. I don't mind him. I'm going to throw another guy out there, and he'll be prominently featured, I believe, or at least featured in our locks this week, is P.J. Walker for Temple against Memphis. Cheap price tag on him. I think he's too expensive on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, Memphis plays at a really high pace, and I just know Walker. I know his some inconsistencies to his game log here, but put up a monster game against SMU, and USF, Notre Dame, East Carolina that day. I want to say that was really bad weather, and they've actually kind of changed their tempo a little bit. I mean, some of the defensive teams he's faced are not terrible there in that conference, and the one terrible defense he faced in SMU, he absolutely lit up. So I'm going to call a kind of a dart play on P.J. Walker over on DraftKings as a possibility. What do you know about the Houston quarterback, Postma?
Just know that if he is the definitive starter before kickoff, I will play him. That's for sure. He's a gunslinger. He throws a lot better than Greg Ward. He's much better in that facet. Not going to run as much, but still sneaky for 6,300 on DraftKings, he would be a really good play if we know he's going to start. I think he's got a lot of upside there. So it's just that's one of those things. I don't know if we'll know the status of the starting quarterback for the University of Houston by the time this game kicks off. We may have to wait to the first series, and if that's the case, then I don't know if you want to take a chance on either one of them, to be honest with you. But Postma, if he is named the starter, and I think he's a great value on both sides. He can throw the ball.
All right, let's and one other guy, Justin Thomas. Don't ignore him. Miami allowing 5.6 yards per carry this year. That's bad. That's 122nd in all of college football. So Georgia Tech should be able to run roughshod over the Canes this week. All right, let's move on. We got to get moving here. Running back spots. You've got Fournette, Booker, Howard, Elliott, kind of the top dogs there. Fournette versus Ole Miss. I mean, yeah, that guy could go crazy. He could bounce back. But, man, it's a heavy price tag to pay against a defense that's been pretty good, pretty much off of Fournette this week. I think I'd prefer Booker or Howard personally. You?
Yeah, I don't like paying up top dollar to face a defense like that, even though I know this guy has serious potential. And clearly Mississippi isn't the same defense as Alabama or Florida or something like that. They're slightly a notch below, but still it's top dollar you're paying here for this guy. And that's not really my style. But at the same time, I wouldn't doubt if we look at the leaderboard at the end of the day and see tournaments were won by guys who paid up for Fournette and got 204 rushing touchdowns, because that's who he is. But I'm off of him this week because of the matchup and the price being so high. I would understand tournament plays who played him, absolutely, but cash games, I would much, much rather have a guy like Devontae Booker.
Yeah, I love Booker. He still hasn't gotten the touchdowns that I would have expected this year. I mean, 12 is not bad, but he hasn't had a multi-touchdown game in like the past 4 weeks. I mean, I guess he could be due for one here against UCLA. They're allowing 181 yards per game on the ground. Jordan Howard, I don't see how you can't play him if you can fit him. He devoured, I mean, just not even devoured, but just ran through 2 top 20 defenses in Iowa and Michigan the last 2 weeks. And now he gets Maryland. I mean, they're going to feed him the ball. He's another guy I love this week. Really expensive, but I can't see him not having like 200 yards in this game.
No, I think he's right there with the elite running backs this week, but then he's priced like that, so they didn't do you any like favors. You're not getting any value there. He's at $8,000. It's a good price. He's a great running back, man. It's kind of what we knew Indiana was going to do when he first came on board this year. He had the injuries, but now he's back. The only worry I have is maybe a little bit of a letdown after that kind of a game against Michigan and a lot of carries, and maybe they don't want to run him into the ground. So instead of 30 carries, maybe he gets 24 carries, and maybe it pulls him back a little bit on his stats. But otherwise, he's an elite play. The question is, he's only a DraftKings play. That game's not even listed on FanDuel. So can you fit him on DraftKings? Can we find enough value to get Howard on there, with a quarterback we like?
Yeah.
That's gonna be the question.
Yeah, I think there is value, and I think there's actually a good bunch in running back, and we'll get to it here in a minute. One game we didn't talk about that's on FanDuel, not DraftKings, is West Virginia, Kansas. And Wendell Smallwood, his price is starting to come up a little bit, but still can't get over $8K at 7,600 against Kansas. I expect him to go for another 150 and probably 2 touchdowns, or at least 1.
Kansas is terrible, and they ought to be eliminated from every fantasy slate from this point forward. They're just a bad team. And the thing you got to worry about with the Kansas game is a severe blowout, and that shouldn't affect him too much in this game, but they're just a bad team. So, yeah, West Virginia is going to put points up. It's just a matter of who's going to be the one who ends up in the end zone for West Virginia.
All right. What do you think of Jahad Thomas here this week? His price has come down a little bit. I guess he is a tad bit maybe questionable for this matchup, but he did play last week. This guy was a stud earlier in the year. He's got touchdowns, I believe, in every game this season, 16 on the year, 6,900 on FanDuel, 8,100 on 6,900 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. Any interest there?
Yeah, this is one that jumped out to me as a potentially pretty good value right here, because when we were looking a month ago at this guy and some of his cupcake matchups, he was 9,800 on FanDuel. He was one of the highest priced running backs out there. Now he's at 8,100 because basically he played Notre Dame, suffered a small injury there, so he had a bad game after that. So he had a bad game, fair game against Notre Dame, bad game after that. And he against SMU when PJ went off, Jahad was hurt that day. Now he got some carries, but he didn't even start that game. I remember he didn't even start that game. He was hurt. So now you get Memphis, who they're not a good defense all around. I know their pass defense looks worse than their run defense, but they're just not good, period. So At 8,100, you got the discount going on there on FanDuel. I'm thinking he's a sneaky little play there because if Temple decides to pound the ball at Memphis, which I think they will be able to do if that's what they want to do, then I think he can have another one of those big games that were reminiscent of the first 5 or 6 or 7 weeks of the season for him.
Okay, give me some middle tier guys here, Chop, that you're looking at. I've got one kind of doozy that's under the radar on DraftKings. But I'm curious. Give me a couple of guys you're looking at.
Oh man, there's some good ones. I mean, well, I'm trying to find the one that I think you would have. If for you personally, I think maybe you might be thinking LaShawn Daniels. I'm not sure.
No.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, I'm gonna stop guessing you right there. I'm gonna stop guessing it. On DraftKings middle tier, I say below 6K. Yikes, there's not a whole lot out there that I'm really in love with below 6K on DraftKings.
Kirby at 61 isn't bad. Maybe.
I was going to mention him, but I thought you might laugh at that since I mentioned him last week and he didn't have very much of a game last week. Yeah, I like Yerby at 6,100. I think it's a pretty solid matchup this week. There's a Michigan back against Penn State. Devion Smith, don't really like that one. There's the Wisconsin backs. I don't really like them either. I don't. There's not a good area right here. Give me something that you like.
Okay, well here you go. First off, Justin Jackson is back. By the way, he's back.
Man, I didn't want to mention that one for you.
I don't hate him. I don't hate him this week. I know Wisconsin on the road, not a best spot potentially, but I'll tell you the guy on DraftKings. You ready? You got your pen and paper? You're playing the 5K queue here. Play yourself some Arkeel Newsome of Connecticut. This kid is kind of do everything. You know, he's kind of a hybrid player, gets a ton of receptions. Last 2 games has only had 3, but went for 72 yards. The 2 games prior to that had 16 receptions, and he is their top running back. I mean, over 20 carries in each of the last 2 games, does stuff on special teams, can return kicks for scores. And, you know, last game, 10 fantasy points against Tulane. Not great, but 38, 22, 21, 29, 23 before that. Solid price tag. I think a high floor with all those receptions. Arkeel Newsome, DraftKings, play him. There you go.
There you go. Well, that is one guy that I did overlook. I got him. I had him written down, but I kind of glanced past him because of the Houston defense is not bad. But now that you mention it, yeah, man, I can get behind that. Listen, I'm ready. I'm not jumping in the $5,000 queue anytime soon, but I can get behind that pick in a $20 game. But no, I mean, you know, here, I hate to give you some guys who listen. Gerald Holmes from Michigan State has pretty good value on both sides. I know it's a tough matchup against Ohio State, but he's getting the bulk of the carries from Michigan State. And I look back to last year, Michigan State, Jeremy Langford put up 137 yards and 3 touchdowns against Ohio State. It just goes to show that Michigan State can run the ball on Ohio State. And if that's what happens in this game, then Gerald Holmes should be the guy getting most of the carries. It's just a good value. 4,600 on DraftKings, that's pretty good.
All right. We've got injuries, we got suspensions, and that means we've got cheap running backs for you this week. Maryland against Indiana. Starter, what was his name? Wes Brown is kicked off the team, so he's no longer. Brandon Ross going to be the starter, 3,300, and he hasn't been horrendous. I mean, if you look at the logs earlier this year, he's had 2 100-yard games, one in that joke game against Richmond, but also went for 130 against West Virginia, 4 touchdowns on the season. He's going to be the starter against Indiana at 3,300. Seems like somebody I'd want. And then the other guy, Clemson, looks like Gallman. I thought I saw he might miss this game. Let me double check on that. I think FanDuel, let's see. Yeah, head coach Dabo Swinney said Tuesday they doesn't expect Gallman to play Saturday unless he's 100%. What do you think there? I mean, we've got Zach Brooks likely as the backup, and I believe he's sitting at a true 3K crapper. If he's out, I don't see how you don't play Brooks.
I think Brooks would probably be the first guy in the backfield that you'd look to, but I think it will be split up quite a bit, spread out for a few different guys at running back. The guys that I would look at, honestly, to carry a lot of the big load there, if they need a big load carried, is Artavis Scott as a wide receiver. I think it's gonna impact his touchdown situation, which is. But for running backs, I think Zach Brooks is the first guy you look at. But I see Brooks I see him maxing out at like 12 carries. It might be enough to get you. I mean, he's real cheap, so you can dig that, especially on DraftKings where you need that value. I think it's spread out. I think Artavis Scott is the guy who benefits from that injury more than anybody else does.
Okay, Georgia Tech. I talked about Miami's terrible rush defense.
Don't do it.
What do we want here? I mean, I'm looking at it. Their highest priced running back on DraftKings is $4,000 in Clinton Lynch. Patrick Scove was a thing for about 2 weeks, and now he's kind of been back, doing nothing. So, is there any Georgia Tech running back worth a darn here? I mean, it's a game they should be able to score some points against Miami.
They should be able to run the ball. They should be able to score points. And with that being said, the only guy I would think about is Justin Thomas in the running game, because the backs, they're just too unpredictable. I mean, they kind of go in these waves and patterns. A guy gets 15 carries for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden you look and he goes 3 games where he doesn't even get 5 carries combined. They just go up and down. Lynch is kind of like maybe the guy who's hot right now, getting a few extra carries now. But when you look at
hot for 3 carries for 6 yards.
Exactly. When you look at their game, put their game logs side by side, and you'll see like all of them getting 4 or 6 carries a game. Like, I just can't find it. Just Justin Thomas, is the only guy I would look at, and I'd play him. I mean, obviously, if you're in a GPP, yeah, you can throw a dart at one of them. But who is it? In cash games, I wouldn't touch them. None of them.
Scove, maybe?
No, man, no way.
You done on Scove?
Dude, I like him first.
Look at these game logs. 1 carry, 2 yards, 2 carries, 8 yards, 3 carries, 5 yards, 2 carries, 4 yards. And the ones before that were 15 for 56, 19 for 75, 18 for 66. Like, well, there's got to be some reason where they just gave up on him. I don't know. Maybe because he's not good, but he's got 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, they all came in the first 3 weeks, I think. But, like, when you watch a game that they play, a different guy gets the ball every other play.
Here it is. Marcus Allen. He's the one who got it last game.
Last game it was, Mark. And look at his game logs before that, though. I mean, what could have possibly predicted that?
And he lost a fumble, so he'll probably go back to the bench. So we'll see. But,
more Scove this week then.
More Scove.
No, I mean, I get it. You want to have a piece of that running game, because Miami hasn't stopped the run, but boy, that's just a tough spot right there to be in.
Yeah, that's strictly a dart. Strictly a dart throw. Trying to figure that one out. Okay, let's move on a little bit to wide receivers here, Chop. And the early slate, not a ton of, there's a few big names out here. Laquan Treadwell, he's been pretty matchup proof this year, Chopper. 7,100 over there on DraftKings. I think he's going to be maybe even top 10 draft pick this year. But do we like him against LSU? I mean, did it against pretty much everyone this season. 7 for 132 last week. Touchdowns in, it looks like, 4 or 5 straight games. Is the matchup too much to be paying 7,100 for Treadwell?
I think it's too much, but I was rather shocked when I did the numbers and looked at the spreads and everything and saw that Mississippi had a projected team total in the low 30s here from Vegas. That's really odd against an LSU team. So maybe they know something we don't know. LSU, I know they've been gashed a little bit lately. I don't know if they've given up.
Did you see what Arkansas did last week?
That was in the running game, though. I don't see Mississippi being able to put up running. I mean, who's Jalen Walton? I don't see that happening. So if they're going to get in the 30s, they're going to have to do it through Treadwell. He's clearly their best offensive player, and it's not even close. So you know what? If you wanted to differentiate yourself from other people in tournaments who will not play him because he's going against LSU and he's the highest priced wide receiver out there, that's the way you do it, and you never know. He's that kind of a guy. He may be like so matchup proof that he can destroy LSU. So I'm not hating on him in tournaments. Cash games, I don't want to spend top dollar on a guy against LSU. Similar to Fournette, I don't want to spend top dollar on a running back against Mississippi. So he's off the board. I'd rather go slightly cheaper if I was going to go this route and go with Juju against Oregon.
I'm with you on the Juju. He's a good Juju this weekend, I think. He's kind of been a little bit, not great the last few weeks. I mean, Colorado 3 for 66, Arizona solid at 8 for 138. But I think he's pretty safe to get in the 20s here in this matchup, which should be high scoring. Yeah, I like Juju as well. I think he's my preferred choice over Treadwell or Burbridge here in terms of the high-end kind of run wide receivers. So, yeah, I don't mind him. Taiwan Taylor in particular on DraftKings, only on DraftKings, pretty cheap. Ayers, I can't touch it. I just don't know what to really expect. I mean, he went off last week, Chop, 13 for 127. Is he more in play with you if Greg Ward is out?
Absolutely. The other Postma is a much better passer, and I think that's why you saw like a 12 catch game last week. He's definitely in play. I think he's in play regardless, because when you really look at his game log, like for $6,100 on DraftKings, his floor is 5 receptions and 50 yards, and a real good shot at a touchdown, or a real shot at up in those receptions. He's got a real good floor. With Postma in there, he's much better. He's even higher floor because that guy's a much better passer than Greg Ward. So I'm absolutely waiting to hear news on the starting quarterback. That'll dictate who I'm taking from Houston. If Ward's in there, I probably avoid Ayers. But if it's Postma, I don't mind. Because if it's Postma in there, the game's probably a little bit closer than if Ward is in there. Maybe it's more competitive and more passing into the fourth quarter for Houston. He's definitely on my radar. And then right below him is Artavis Scott. I think Artavis Scott finds the end zone this week. They're going to need to substitute, find that guy who's going to score that would have been that Gallman touchdown, or maybe 2 Gallman touchdowns. Somebody's got to get those touchdowns. I think Artavis Scott would be my lead guy that I would suspect eats up.
Might be one of, if not the highest owned guy in Playboy, 5,300 on FanDuel. And, I mean, receptions are there. The only thing he doesn't have is touchdowns. I mean, 12, 9, 7, was slowed down by Miami, had 1, but then 10 against Boston College. And you're right, the touchdowns just haven't been there. And I think he's going to be really popular here in this matchup, and rightfully so. Certainly at that price point, 5,300 is kind of a gimme. Let's look at some other wide receivers we got here. Carrington, I had that off game last week against Stanford. I think we can accept that. Still scored a touchdown, but went for 100 in the 3 games prior to that on his comeback. And you know what? Some of those games he had dropped passes where he should have had like more yards and touchdowns than he ended up. What do you think of Carrington going against the Trojans?
This kid's a stud, man. I mean, I don't know if it's the fact that he is making Adams look decent finally, or if Adams being healthy is really getting him some good looks. But he's a stud. I like him, especially on FanDuel, because I think his game is more suited for FanDuel. I don't think he'll get you a ton of receptions, but easily could get you a 70-yard touchdown pass in one play. And so I think that's best suited for FanDuel. But I like him. I think the game itself is a shootout. I don't see USC being able to say, we're going to shut down Carrington. There's a lot of weapons on Oregon, so that helps him out a lot. So I like Carrington a lot this week against USC in a big-time Pac-12 shootout, man.
Absolutely. All right, give me some other names that you're looking at wide receiver.
Lower dollar than that, I'll probably go back to Stacy Coley this week. I think that was a tough defense last week in North Carolina. I think this is a much better matchup for him against Georgia Tech. If he's healthy and in that game, I like Coley. Another guy I would look at, Alex Erickson, coming off the bye week. Northwestern's really good against the run. Corey Clement is questionable to doubtful. We don't really know his status. If he's out, they seem to funnel a lot of the offense to Alex Erickson when they can't get the running game going, and I don't expect them to get it going against Northwestern. So I like Erickson down there. I don't want to say Isaiah Ford because I've probably had enough of picking on North Carolina's pass defense. They're pretty good. But this guy seems to make plays every week. I can't hate on that. 4,800 on DraftKings for a bona fide number one wide receiver with a team total of nearly over 4 touchdowns, actually. That's pretty good value right there. Those are some of those guys. And then if you go really low, much lower, 4,800 on FanDuel, this guy Deion Kane for Clemson is starting to make some plays. He's a young guy. So I said somebody's going to take up the space for Gallman. Maybe it might not be Artavis Scott. Maybe it may be Deion Kane for even cheaper. He's a real playmaker, and this clearly a matchup where they won't, if they want to get the ball to Kane, Wake Forest won't be able to stop him.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate either the Utah. Covey and Scott are really cheap. Covey's a guy I kind of don't hate here at 4,700. Another guy who's got some decent numbers, but he's just kind of short on touchdowns. And, he's had a couple of multi-touchdown games against Oregon and USC. So he's done it against, better competition than just, putting up big numbers against, Cal and Washington State and those guys. So at 4,700 in terms of kind of a low dollar crapper per se, I think you could do worse than him. We got to keep our eye on Memphis too. Anthony Miller is a guy who is might not play, and if he's out, you've got some cheaper wide receivers there in Memphis, and Paxton Lynch is certainly going to throw it. So I think a guy like Mose Frazier is somebody to look at because he can do it running or passing. 5 touchdowns on the season isn't a lot, but at 5,900, not a killer salary on him. If you're playing FanDuel, you got Shelton Gibson as well against Kansas. He's their best receiver, and they're playing the worst team in Division I. So, fire him up with confidence. Do you trust Switzer at all? 5,200.
Very, very little, and not enough to roster this week. I wouldn't do it if I was going to be in that particular range and I was going to take a dart throw. I would just pick one of those LSU wide receivers who are big play guys. And, we've seen the effects of the teams trying to stuff the line of scrimmage and stop Fournette. One of these LSU wide receivers is having big games just about every week now. So take your pick of between Dupree and I can't find the other guy, but there's 2 good LSU wide receivers there.
I believe that would be Travin Durrell.
Durrell and Dupree. One of them seems to have a good game every week because they're focused on Fournette so much. So $4,300 for Dupree on DraftKings is a pretty good price. I mean, there's a lot of guys in this range you can look at on DraftKings. Matt Vanderberg gets a lot of receptions for Iowa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying, listen, I'm not playing him. I'm just saying he gets a lot of receptions. He gets a pretty good chunk. There's Laverne Jacobs if you wanted to take a real flyer on a 3,300 guy and a good matchup. Laverne Jacobs is down there. And then in the same game against Maryland, Simi Cobbs or Ricky Jones is still, I'd say, underpriced on DraftKings, below 4,000. So either one of those. There's a lot of options down here. This is where I'd probably save my money if I wanted to get a high dollar running back.
You're not saving it with Zach Brooks? Come on, man. Zach Brooks can prove you wrong.
He could. Zach Brooks might be all right. But the problem with Brooks is, let's say, well, not the problem, but that's who am I going to spend it on? I mean, then you could get Juju. I think you could get Juju anyway.
Yeah.
Treadwell, some of the higher, if you're going to go low on running back, that means you're going high on receiver. I'm not high on a lot of these guys at receiver on FanDuel, you know what I mean? Like Tywan Taylor and Dangerfield are not on FanDuel this week, so you're stuck with Treadwell or Burbridge if you go real low on running back. I don't know. It's one of those roster construction things this week. You're going to have to see what suits you best.
No reason to chase Michigan, right?
Michigan, I don't see it this week. I think they've used up everything. I mean, that was a lot last week. I don't think you can ask for that kind of a game again. If I was going to look at a Michigan receiver, I've always been partial to Darboh this year. I know Chesson's been the guy the last couple weeks. And the fact that you've got to mention both of them in the same vein kind of doesn't do you good in fantasy. That means there's 2 of them, and one of them's not going to perform well probably. It's Penn State. I think they're riding a high cloud from last week, and I think they're going to fall down this week. So I'd probably avoid the Michigan guys.
All right, let's get to the always fun tight end position here, Chopper. And, Jake Butt's been good to us the last couple of weeks. Had a nice, decent salary. But, as he should be, his price has risen, $3,700 against Penn State. I'm not chasing those points. If I'm paying up for someone, I think I'm looking to Jordan Leggett at $3,500 probably as the target for me. I don't hate Bucky Hodges at 36 either, but if I had to pick one, probably Leggett.
Yeah, the high-priced guys aren't there at tight end this week. If I was going to pick one in that range, it would have been Hodges, just because I think he has a little bit more upside than Leggett. But, personally, I don't want to be in this range this week. I'd rather get down to 2,400 or below. Or 2,600 and below. I think there's a few guys that are better values down there. Guys like Josiah Price, who that's a touchdown waiting to happen in this game. They don't unleash him unless they really need him in games like this, and they're going to need him. So I think that's a good touchdown out there. You could even go with Nick Vannett in the same game. Once again, the
2K crapper last week for you.
Yes,
didn't do bad.
The kind of the game that they're in is going to dictate whether they use these kind of tight ends, and this is the kind of a game where both of these guys could be in play. And for 2,500, the Wisconsin tight end Fumagalli is lurking out there, and so I'm not hating on him. Yeah, I'd rather be at the 2,500 or below range this week on tight end.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a show if I didn't mention Evan Ingram again.
Go for it. Hey, this might be the game. I mean, it's one of those games. It's LSU. What else? How else are they going to get to that 30-point team total Vegas has projected?
You got to think they're going to slide coverage over to Treadwell's side a little bit more, right?
You got to think, and they don't have a running. Mississippi doesn't have a running game. Somebody's going to get it. This may be the Evan Ingram breakout week right here.
Wouldn't it be something, Evan Ingram?
Oh, don't say it.
Wins me 100K. Wouldn't that be a thing if I played him all year long and did jack crap, and then I went back to the well one more time, and he gets me 2 touchdowns? Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be an Evan Ingram island because there's only so many choices I think at tight end this week. But he's under consideration. I'll give him that. I agree with all the names you mentioned though at tight end. Chop, it's that time for us to wrap it up. We thank everyone for joining us here today. I know it's a little bit early in the week, earlier than normal, but we felt like we wanted to get this out. I don't know next week if we're going to get it out. It's Thanksgiving week. We normally do that on Thursday. So we'll see what the schedules are. Maybe we can fit in an hour, maybe not. But regardless, we thank you for checking us out today. Chopper, I want to see you hold up a big check sometime this weekend, a second place check.
Hey, man, how about you hold the check up this weekend?
That would be great. I'd love to hold up a big check.
Why don't you get you a big check there? I mean, I've had that experience before, and it was fun. So I think you need to get you some of that, man.
You know what, Chopper? That's why I love you. That's why you're such.
Just give me a piece of it, man. Give me a piece of it, and then we'll be all right. Then I'll really be rooting.
I'm sure there's business arrangements made at some point in time, but no, I appreciate that, Chopper. Way to spread the goodness around to everybody.
Before we go, if there's one guy I don't want to see hold a check this week,
draft cheat.
It's Bowen's friend, this Chris guy who's riding our ass on Twitter. I don't know what that's all about.
Okay, here you want the story on this?
Okay, that's your buddy, right?
By the way,
this
isn't like his friend isn't riding anybody's ass. It's Bowen's being Bowen's on Twitter. And his friend that he's referring to is, believe it or not, was the best man in my wedding. Like, he and his brother are probably friends I've had since kindergarten. I've known these guys for as long as I, can remember, and got him into daily fantasy. They love the college sports, and he queued like the last week. And it's funny because I didn't know Brad until he was like, they were like frat brothers together. So I met Bowens. I brought Bowens into the DFS world through this guy. So if you want to hate, if you don't like Bowens, then you better go and, say like, thanks for coming to daily fantasy. Thanks for doing that, Chi-Town Chris. But I promise you, he is a way nicer and cooler guy. No offense, Bowens, but level-headed than Bowens. Okay. He's very quiet and laid back.
Well, there's history here. This should make for an interesting Saturday at the mansion.
It is. So if you see 2 6'8" guys, they're giants. They are absolute giants. You won't be able to miss them. But they're good friends of mine. And yeah, so Brad, hopefully, I don't know why you're talking smack for somebody who's I don't even know what he's doing.
All right, then he can hold up a check as long as it's not bigger than yours.
Okay, that works. That works. But good luck to everybody who's competing this weekend, whether it is in a live final or just your everyday online tournaments. And as I always am telling you, make sure your voice is heard. There's a lot of people taking aim at daily fantasy. This community we've built here at Roto Grinders and in general for daily fantasy sports has been terrific, been amazing. And we don't want to see it go away. And having your voice heard on a lot of different platforms is really important. Not just somebody who's, got a face in the industry. The faceless actually have even a larger voice in this sort of environment that we're in today. So I think DKPlayersAlliance.com is a great site. I know you retweeted Seth Yates' story out the other day, which is excellent. And hopefully some other people can add their own to that. So till next week, for my buddy Head Chopper, I'm Dan Bach. Good luck in all your games, and we will see ya.